You have learned about the three types of data in Python. We have numbers, strings, and booleans. Now, there are times you want to convert the value of a variable from one type to another. Let me show you. So we're going to use our input function to read the user's birth year. So enter your birth year. Now, this input function is going to return a value, so we can store it in a variable called birth underline year. Okay? Now let's write code to calculate the age of this user. So we write an expression like this. Currently, we are in the year 2020. So 2020 minus birth year. This expression or piece of code is going to produce a value. So once again, we can store that value in a variable. Let's call that variable age. Now let's print age on the terminal. Let's run our program and see what happens. So my birth year is 1982. Enter. Oops, our program crashed. So whenever you see this red message, that indicates an error. So this error occurred in this file, that is our app.py, on line 2. Right below that, you can see the piece of code that generated this error. So that is this expression, 2020 minus birth year. Now below that, you can see the type of error. So here we have unsupported types for subtraction. We have int and stir. What are these? Well, this int is short for integer, and that represents a whole number in programming. So 2020 is an example of an integer. Now, birth year is an example of a string, because whenever we call the input function, this function will return a value as a string, even if we enter a number. In other words, when I entered 1982, this input function returned a string with these characters, 1982. So this string is different from the number 1982. They're completely different types. So in this case, let me delete these lines. The reason we got this error is that we tried to subtract a string from an integer. So our code looked like this, 1982. Now, Python doesn't know how to subtract a string from an integer. So to solve this problem, we need to convert this string to an integer. Now in Python, we have a bunch of built-in functions for converting the types of our variables. So we have this int function. We can pass our birth year to it, and this will return the numeric representation of the birth year. So to solve this problem, we need to replace the string with the int function. So let's see what's going on here. On the first line, we call the input function. This returns a string. On the second line, we pass the string to our int function. The int function will return the numeric representation of the birth year. Then we subtract it from 2020. We get the age and store it in the age variable. Now let's run our program. So 1982, and there you go. I'm 38 years old. So this is how the int function works. Now we also have another built-in function called float. That is for converting a value to a floating point number. A floating point number in Python and other programming languages is a number with a decimal point. So 10 is an integer and 10.1 is a float. So we have int, we have float, and we also have bool for converting a value to a boolean. And finally, we have stir for converting a value to a string. So these are the built-in functions for converting the type of our variables in a basic calculator program. All right, first we're going to call our input function to read the first number. We get the result and store it in a variable called first. Now, let's declare another variable called second and read the second number. Now, we calculate the sum. So that is first plus second. Now let's see what happens when we print sum on the terminal. So I enter 10 and 20, but instead of 30, we get 1020. This is because we're combining or concatenating two strings. So, as I told you before, the input function returns a string. So this line will be equivalent to first equals 10. You're dealing with a string, not an integer. Similarly, second is going to be 20 as a string. So when we combine two strings, 10 plus 20, we'll get 1020 because we're dealing with textual data. Okay, so to solve this problem, we need to convert the values we read to their numeric representation. So over here, we're going to pass first to our int function, and here as well. Now let's run our program. So we enter 10 and 20, we get 30. What if we enter a floating point number? So 10.1 and 20. We got an error. So to solve this problem, we need to treat both these values as floats. So instead of the int function, we're going to use the float function. Now, let's run our program one more time. We enter a whole number and a floating point number. So the result is correct. Now, let's add a label over here. So sum is plus sum. Let's run our program one more time. 10 and 20. Once again, we got an error. The error is saying that Python can only concatenate strings, not floats to strings. So on line 4, we have a string. We're concatenating this with a float because the result of this expression is a floating point number. We're adding 2 floats, so the result is a float as well. So Python doesn't know how to evaluate code like this. It doesn't know how to concatenate a float to a string. To solve this problem, we need to convert sum to a string. So this is where we use the stir function. Now, let's run the program again. So 10 plus 20.1, and here's the result. And one last thing. In this example, I'm calling the float function. At the time, we want to calculate the sum of these 2 numbers, but this is not a requirement. We can call the float function over here. So this input function returns a string. We can pass that string to our float function. Take a look. So float, parentheses, like this. So the value that we're passing to the float function is the value that is returned from the input function. Similarly, we call the float function over here. Now, we can change this expression to first plus second. That is another way to write this piece of code. So type conversion is important in Python and other programming languages. There are times you need to convert the type of a variable to a different type.